In the serene town of Everwood, surrounded by lush forests and tranquil lakes, there is a hidden history that few are aware of. The town is known for its picturesque landscapes and tight-knit community, but beneath this peaceful exterior lies a legacy of racial inequality and systemic oppression that has shaped the lives of its residents for generations. A group of 5 friends, Talia, a passionate and driven civil rights attorney, Ethan, a reflective and insightful journalist, Maya, a compassionate and dedicated social worker, Cole, a charismatic and persuasive community organizer, and Riley, a creative and visionary artist, come together to uncover the truth about Everwood's past and its impact on the present. Friends are drawn together by a shared sense of justice and a desire to challenge the status quo. They are inspired by the stories of their ancestors and the struggles they faced, and they are determined to make a difference in their community. Their journey begins with a chance discovery in the town archives. While researching a school project, Talia stumbles upon a collection of old documents and photographs that reveal a history of racial segregation and discrimination in Everwood. The records show that the town had once been divided into separate neighborhoods, with Black residents confined to an area known as the Flats, a place characterized by poverty, neglect, and limited opportunities. The friends are shocked by what they uncover and decide to investigate further. They interview elderly residents who lived through the era of segregation, listening to their stories of resilience and resistance. One woman in particular stands out, a woman named Clara, who grew up in the Flats and went on to become a prominent community leader. Clara shares her experiences of growing up in a segregated town, the challenges she faced, and the strength she found in her community. She speaks of the courage it took to fight for change and the sacrifices that were made along the way. Her story is one of hope and determination, and it inspires the friends to continue their work. Maya, the social worker, is particularly moved by Clara's story. She sees the parallels between the struggles of the past and the challenges facing the community today. She begins to work with local organizations to address issues of poverty, education, and healthcare, advocating for policies and programs that will promote equity and inclusion. As the friends delve deeper into the town's history, they begin to experience strange occurrences. They hear whispers in the wind, echoes of the past that seem to call out to them. They feel a presence, a connection to the people who lived through the era of segregation and the struggles they endured. Ethan, the journalist, is particularly affected by these experiences. He begins to have vivid dreams of the people he has interviewed and the stories they have shared. In his dreams, he sees the faces of those who fought for justice and feels their pain and determination. The dreams are both haunting and enlightening, and they leave him with a sense of urgency to tell their stories. Ethan writes a series of articles about the history of racism in Everwood, shining a light on the injustices of the past and their ongoing impact on the present. His work is both powerful and poignant, capturing the resilience and strength of the community in the face of adversity. Cole, the community organizer, works to mobilize the community and build a movement for change. He organizes rallies, protests, and other events, demanding that the town acknowledge its history and take action to address the legacy of racism. His efforts help to galvanize the community, creating a sense of solidarity and purpose among those who are fighting for justice. Cole also works to connect with other activists and organizations, both locally and nationally, to build a broader movement for racial justice. He believes that the struggle for equality is a long-term fight, and he is committed to doing everything in his power to make a difference. Riley, the artist, uses her talents to create a series of murals that depict the history and resilience of the Black community in Everwood. Her work is both beautiful and powerful, capturing the spirit of the community and the struggles it has faced. The murals become a source of pride for the community, a testament to the power of art to inspire and unite. The murals also serve as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for justice and the importance of continuing the fight for a better future. They are a call to action for the community, urging them to confront the legacy of racism and work towards a more just and equitable society. In the end, the Friends succeed in bringing the hidden history of Everwood to light. Their efforts help to spark a conversation about the town's past and its impact on the present. They know that the road ahead is long and difficult, but they are united in their commitment to fight for justice, equality, and recognition. In the wake of their efforts to uncover the hidden history of Everwood, Talia, Ethan, Maya, Cole, and Riley found themselves at a pivotal moment. They had succeeded in bringing the town's buried past to light, but they knew that the fight for justice and equality was far from over. The legacy of racism and systemic oppression continued to cast a long shadow over the community, and the Friends were determined to break the chains that had bound Everwood for so long. The Friends decided to stay in Everwood, dedicating themselves to the ongoing struggle for civil rights and social justice. They were united by a shared vision of a town that honored its past while embracing a future of equity and inclusion for all its residents. The Friends gathered at a local community center, a place that had become a hub for their activities and a sanctuary for those seeking support and solidarity. The center was filled with the energy of people coming together, united by a common purpose and a desire for change. Talia, the civil rights attorney, focused her efforts on legal advocacy and policy reform. She worked with local officials and organizations to draft and implement policies that would address the root causes of inequality and promote social justice. Her work included initiatives to improve access to education, healthcare, and affordable housing, as well as efforts to reform the criminal justice system and address police brutality. Talia also organized legal clinics and workshops, providing free legal services and education to members of the community. Her goal was to empower people with the knowledge and tools they needed to fight for their rights and to challenge the systems that had oppressed them for so long. Ethan, the journalist, continued to document the stories of the town's residents, focusing on the ongoing struggles for justice and equality. He wrote articles and produced multimedia pieces that highlighted the experiences of marginalized communities and the efforts of activists and organizers working for change. His work gained national attention, drawing the eyes of the country to the little town of Everwood and its ongoing fight for civil rights. Ethan's reporting was both powerful and nuanced, capturing the complexities of the issues at hand and the resilience of the people who were fighting for a better future. Ethan also used his platform to amplify the voices of those who had been historically marginalized and silenced. He believed that storytelling was a powerful tool for change, and he was determined to use his skills to make a difference. Mia, the social worker, continued to provide support and resources to those who were affected by the ongoing struggles for justice and equality. She organized support groups, counseling sessions, and other services, helping people to cope with the challenges they faced and to find strength and hope in the face of adversity. Maya also worked to address the root causes of inequality and injustice, advocating for policies and programs that would promote equity and inclusion. She believed that social change required both immediate action and long-term vision, and she was committed to doing everything in her power to create a more just and equitable society. Maya also collaborated with other social workers and mental health professionals to develop programs that addressed the trauma and stress experienced by members of the community. Her work helped to build resilience and strength within the community, and it also served as a reminder of the importance of compassion and empathy in the fight for justice. Cole, the community organizer, worked tirelessly to build coalitions and mobilize support for the cause of civil rights. He organized rallies, marches, and protests, bringing together people from all walks of life to demand change and accountability. His efforts helped to galvanize the community, creating a sense of solidarity and purpose among those who were fighting for justice. Cole also worked to build bridges between different groups and organizations, fostering a spirit of collaboration and unity. Through his work, Cole helped to create a powerful movement for change, one that was rooted in the history and experiences of the people of Everwood. He believed that the fight for justice was a long-term struggle, and he was committed to doing everything in his power to make a difference. Riley, the artist, continued to use her talents to create art that inspired and empowered the community. She created a series of murals and installations that celebrated the resilience and strength of the community, as well as the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. Her work was displayed in public spaces throughout the town, serving as a reminder of the power of art to inspire and unite. Riley also organized art workshops and events, providing a space for community members to express themselves and to connect with each other through art. The Friends' work in Everwood was not without its challenges, but they remained committed to their vision of a town that honored its past while embracing the future. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were united in their determination to fight for justice, equality, and recognition. DeAndre Wilkins had never feared hard work. Born and raised in a small town in Georgia, he had learned from a young age that the world would never hand him anything. His grandfather had been a sharecropper who worked himself to the bone, but was still cheated out of his land. His father had fought in Vietnam only to return home to segregation and job discrimination. And DeAndre himself, he had spent his whole life proving that he was more than the world expected him to be. He had worked his way through college, taking shifts at a local diner while studying for his degree in engineering. He graduated with honors, the first in his family to do so. He had dreams of designing bridges and infrastructure that would serve communities like his own, places that had been forgotten by politicians and developers. When he landed a job at Dunham and Pierce, a prestigious engineering firm in Atlanta, he thought he had made it. But racism had a way of reshaping itself. It didn't always show up as slurs or outright hatred. Sometimes it was a quiet, suffocating force, a wall you didn't even know was there until you ran headfirst into it. It started with the small things. His ideas in meetings would go unnoticed, only for a white colleague to repeat them minutes later and get praised. When it was time to assign leadership roles for a new highway project, his boss, a man named Richard Malone, chose a less experienced white engineer instead. At first, DeAndre tried to ignore it. He told himself that if he worked harder, if he spoke up more, they would see his value. Then came the Cumberland Bridge project. It was one of the biggest infrastructure contracts in the city. A multi-million-dollar deal to replace an aging bridge. DeAndre had spent months perfecting a new, cost-sufficient design that could be built faster and last longer. He poured everything he had into the proposal, running calculations late into the night, double-checking every detail. When the final presentation came, he walked into the boardroom confident, ready to prove his worth. But he never got the chance. Before he could even begin, Richard Malone took over. He presented DeAndre's work as his own. He didn't mention DeAndre's name once. DeAndre sat there in stunned silence as his own design was praised by the executives. A project he had built from the ground up. Later that day, he confronted Richard in his office. "That was my work," DeAndre said, his voice controlled but firm. Richard leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "It's the company's work now." DeAndre clenched his fists. "You didn't even credit me." Richard sighed, as if DeAndre was a child throwing a tantrum. "You have a future here, DeAndre, but you need to learn how things work." DeAndre took a slow breath. "And how is that?" Richard smiled. "Play your role, work hard, and when the time is right, you'll get your shot." DeAndre stared at him. "I just had my shot, and you stole it." Richard shrugged. "I made it better." Something in DeAndre snapped. He had spent his whole life waiting for a seat at the table, believing that hard work would be enough. It never was. That night, he sent in his resignation. And the next morning, he started planning how to take them down. The first step was gathering evidence. DeAndre still had access to company emails and project records. He started documenting everything, not just his stolen work, but the history of racial discrimination at Dunham and Pierce. He wasn't the only one. He found emails where black engineers were referred to as diversity hires, performance reviews that rated white employees higher despite worse results, a pattern of black and Latino engineers being overlooked for promotions. It was a systemic problem, and DeAndre was going to expose it. The next step was the lawsuit. DeAndre partnered with a civil rights attorney, Maya Thompson, who had spent years fighting discrimination cases in corporate America. She was relentless, fearless, exactly who he needed. "We're going after them," she said after reviewing the evidence. "Not just for you, for everyone they've screwed over." She filed a class action lawsuit against Dunham and Pierce, citing racial discrimination, stolen intellectual property, and workplace bias. When the news broke, the firm panicked. They called him. "Let's talk, DeAndre. We can work something out." He ignored them. The story exploded. Former employees came forward, black engineers who had been fired for no reason, Latino workers who had been passed over for promotions. The company tried to bury it, but Malik, a journalist who had exposed police corruption before, picked up the story. And then came the smear campaign. Suddenly, articles appeared calling DeAndre disgruntled, accusing him of weaponizing race for personal gain. His old boss, Richard Malone, went on TV. Mr. Wilkins was a valued employee. but he simply wasn't ready for a leadership position. His claims are baseless. DeAndre watched the interview, his blood boiling. He had given them everything, and now they were trying to destroy him, but they didn't expect what happened next. Malik dug deeper. He found financial records, proof that Dunham and Pierce had taken government diversity grants but never actually hired or promoted black engineers. The firm was committing fraud. The next morning it was front-page news. By the end of the week, Dunham and Pierce was under federal investigation. And then the final blow. A whistleblower came forward. An executive assistant leaked emails proving that Richard Malone had knowingly stolen DeAndre's work. With the evidence mounting, the company had no choice. They settled for $40 million. Richard Malone was forced to resign. And Dunham and Pierce? They lost their biggest contracts. DeAndre could have taken the money and walked away. Instead, he did something bigger. He used the settlement to start his own firm, a company that hired black engineers, Latino architects, and people who had been shut out of opportunities. Within a year, Wilkins Engineering and Design was one of the fastest growing firms in Atlanta. And then, one day, his phone rang. It was a government official. They were looking for a firm to lead a major infrastructure project, a highway project. The same project Dunham and Pierce had lost. "You're our first choice," the official said. DeAndre smiled. "Let's build something better." A year later, as he stood in front of the completed bridge, he saw a plaque mounted on the side. Designed by Wilkins Engineering and Design. Underneath, in smaller letters, "For those who were never given a seat at the table. So, we built our own." DeAndre smiled. They had tried to erase him. Instead, he had built something that would last forever. DeAndre Wilkins had built something from the ground up. Wilkins Engineering and Design wasn't just another firm. It was a statement. A black-owned engineering company that refused to play by the rules of a system that had always tried to keep people like him out. His firm had secured major contracts, hired engineers who had been overlooked elsewhere, and proven that talent had no racial boundaries. But success came with new battles. Now that he had made it to the top, powerful people who had once ignored him were paying attention. Not because they respected him, but because they wanted to see him fail. And they were about to try everything in their power to make that happen. It started with the Greenwood Bridge contract. The city had put out a bid for a major infrastructure project, a $300 million bridge expansion meant to ease traffic congestion in one of Atlanta's fastest-growing areas. Wilkins Engineering put in the best bid. His design was more cost-effective, environmentally sustainable, and structurally superior to any other firm's proposal. Even the city's own independent review board ranked it as the best option. DeAndre knew this contract would cement his firm as a powerhouse in the industry. But then, the contract was awarded to someone else. A firm with ties to city officials. A firm that hadn't even ranked in the top 3. A white-owned firm with a history of cutting corners and ignoring safety concerns. DeAndre knew immediately what had happened. This wasn't about the best design. It was about keeping power in the same hands it had always been in. He could have walked away, could have shrugged it off and moved on to the next project. But that wasn't who he was. He demanded answers, and when he started digging, he found exactly what he expected. Corruption. City officials had rigged the selection process to ensure that a politically connected firm got the contract. Emails leaked from the city's infrastructure office revealed backroom deals, kickbacks, and favoritism. They had never intended to award the contract to Wilkins Engineering, because they didn't want a black-owned firm leading a project of this scale. Deandro took the fight public. He held a press conference. He had the best design. We had the best plan. And yet, the contract was given to a firm with a history of failure. The people of Atlanta deserve better. They deserve a process that is fair, transparent, and honest. The media picked up the story. People started asking questions. And then the attacks came. It started with smear campaigns. Articles suddenly appeared questioning his company's experience. Anonymous sources claimed that Wilkins Engineering wasn't ready for a project of this size. Then, city officials started pushing regulations that only applied to his firm. More audits, more delays on other projects. And then, the final blow. His bank suddenly froze one of his company's accounts. They claimed it was a compliance issue, but Deandre knew better. This was how power worked. If they couldn't beat you fairly, they would bleed you dry. But what they didn't realize was he wasn't fighting alone. Malik, the journalist who had helped expose Dunham and Pierce, was already investigating. He found a web of corruption that ran deeper than just the Greenwood Bridge contract. A network of city officials, lobbyists, and business executives who had been manipulating contracts for years. They had stolen millions from taxpayers. And now their secrets were about to be exposed. The day the article dropped, it sent shockwaves through Atlanta. City officials were caught funneling money into private accounts. The firm that had been awarded the Greenwood contract, their CEO was found to have bribed a selection committee member. The city was forced to cancel the contract. And in a historic reversal, the Greenwood Bridge contract was awarded to Wilkins Engineering. Deandre had won, but the victory came at a cost. A week later, he was leaving his office late at night when he noticed a car following him. At first, he ignored it, but when he switched lanes and the car did the same, he knew it wasn't a coincidence. He pulled into a gas station. The car kept going, but the message was clear. They were watching. He had pissed off the wrong people, and they wanted him to know it. Malik called the next morning. "Be careful, man," he said. "I got a tip that people in City Hall are looking for ways to bring you down." Deandre sighed. "They already tried." "They lost." Malik hesitated. "They don't take losing lightly." Deandre knew he was right. He had embarrassed people in power, and now they were coming for him. The next attack came in the form of a lawsuit. A former employee suddenly claimed that Wilkins Engineering had engaged in fraudulent business practices. The timing was too perfect. They had planted someone inside his company. The lawsuit was meant to drain his resources, damage his reputation, and keep him distracted. But Deandre was ready. He hired the best lawyers in the country. He countersued for defamation. And when Malik dug into the plaintiff's background, he found connections to city officials. This wasn't a lawsuit. It was a hit job. DeAndre exposed it. And within a month, the case was dropped. Another failed attempt to take him down. A year later, the Greenwood Bridge was completed ahead of schedule. It became a symbol of change, a testament to what could happen when the system was forced to play fair. And Wilkins Engineering, it was bigger than ever. DeAndre had expanded the company, hiring more young Black and Latino engineers, mentoring the next generation. And then, one day, he got a call. A federal agency wanted to work with him on a nationwide infrastructure project. A multi-billion-dollar deal. The kind of contract that would change everything. He had started out as a kid from Georgia who just wanted a fair shot. Now, he was redefining the industry. And for the people who had tried to stop him, they had only made him stronger. That night, as he stood on the Greenwood Bridge, looking out at the city skyline, he thought about his grandfather, about his father, about all the Black men before him who had built this country but never got the credit. And he made a promise. He wouldn't just succeed. He would make sure no one else had to fight this hard just to be treated fairly, because the next generation wouldn't have to ask for a seat at the table. They would own the table. The air in Boston was thick with the weight of history. Old bricks and cobblestone streets, whispering stories of revolution and resistance. But some wars had never ended. They had just changed their uniforms. Darius Coleman had grown up in this city, in the shadow of Harvard and MIT, where money and power dripped from the walls like ivy, but somehow never reached neighborhoods like his. Roxbury, the part of Boston where Black families had built their lives, wasn't in the history books. It wasn't in the brochures. It wasn't in the minds of the students who walked through the city like they owned it. But Darius knew every street, every shortcut, every unspoken rule about where he could and couldn't go. And yet, on the night it happened, he had gone anyway. He had been in Beacon Hill, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city, picking up food for his boss. It wasn't the first time he had made a late-night run, balancing 2 jobs while juggling night classes at a community college. He had dreams of becoming an architect, dreams of designing buildings instead of walking past them, knowing he would never afford to live inside. The restaurant was expensive, the kind where a steak cost more than his entire grocery bill for the week. He had been careful, moving quickly, keeping his hood down, knowing exactly how he looked to the people inside. A tall Black man, dressed in clothes too simple for a place like this, standing out like ink on a white page. The cashier had barely looked at him. The customers had stolen glances, silent but clear. What is he doing here? He ignored it. He always ignored it. He had almost made it back to his car when he saw the woman, blonde, late 30s, dressed in designer workout clothes, on the phone, walking fast. She had turned the corner and stopped. Her eyes met his. Her body tensed. And Darius knew. He had seen it before. The way people froze when they saw him, the way their hands reached for their bags, their pockets, their phones, as if his skin was a weapon. He kept walking, his heartbeat steady, his eyes forward. But she didn't move. She watched him. Then, slowly, she lifted her phone to her ear and whispered something. And Darius heard it. "There's a black man following me." The words hit like a slap, like a hammer to the ribs, knocking the air out of his lungs. He wasn't following her. He was just walking. But that didn't matter, because in her mind she had already decided what he was. And now so would the police. He glanced at the street signs. No cameras, no crowds, no one to see what would happen next. He thought about running, but he knew better. Running would make it worse. So he did the only thing he could do. He stopped, raised his hands, and waited. The sirens came fast, too fast, like they had been waiting for a reason. The first officer was out of the car before it had even stopped moving, hand already on his gun. Hands where I can see them. Darius didn't move, didn't breathe. Another officer rushed forward, his voice sharp. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Darius forced himself to stay calm. "I was picking up food." "For who?" "My boss." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You got ID?" Darius nodded, slowly, carefully. "It's in my pocket." "Move slow." He did. Every second stretched too long, the night pressing down on him like a weight. The officers took his wallet, his student ID, his work badge. They flipped through them, looking for something, anything, to justify what they were doing. The woman who had called them stood nearby, still clutching her phone. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He wanted to ask her why. Why had she done this? Why had she assumed the worst? Why did she still look afraid, even as she watched the police surround him? But he already knew. She wouldn't have an answer, or at least not one she would admit, because to her, his existence was a threat, even when he did nothing, even when he was innocent, even when he was the one in danger. They let him go, eventually, after they had searched his car, after they had asked him the same questions over and over, after they had made sure that he knew that in a place like this, he didn't belong. He drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. When he finally parked outside his apartment, he sat there, staring at his hands, at his skin, at the thing that had put him in danger. His phone buzzed. A text from his boss. "Prude, get here." Darius exhaled. He typed back, "Yeah." "I'm fine." A lie, because he wasn't. And he wasn't sure if he ever would be. The winter air in Philadelphia was sharp, cutting through layers of fabric like it had something to prove. Darius Coleman walked down 52nd Street, hands buried deep in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. It had been 8 months since that night in Boston, the night he learned that walking while black could be a crime. He had left the city soon after, telling himself that things would be different here. Philly had history, but it also had blackness woven into its bones. Malcolm X had walked these streets, activists had built movements here, and the people had fought for their place in ways he had never seen before. But no city erased racism. It only disguised it. Darius had found a job at an architecture firm, a small but promising company that focused on urban design. It wasn't what he wanted yet, but it was closer than anything he had before. He had spent years studying buildings, admiring the way cities were shaped. Now, he was finally on the inside. But the inside didn't always want him there. It started with small things. The way his colleagues, all white, talked over him in meetings. The way clients directed their questions to the white interns, even when Darius was the one with the answers. The way his boss, Ethan Wallace, a man with a Harvard degree and the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in his life, called him Daryl for the first 2 months. Still, Darius let it go. He had learned that fighting every battle meant never winning the war. But then came the trip to Chestnut Hill. Chestnut Hill was one of the richest parts of Philadelphia, a neighborhood that looked like it had been lifted straight out of a history book. Red brick mansions, manicured gardens, expensive cars lining the streets like trophies. It was the kind of place where black people only existed in 2 forms: behind a uniform or holding a rake. Darius was neither, but he was there for work. Ethan had assigned him to survey a historic estate, a property the firm was planning to renovate. It should have been routine: walk the site, take notes, report back. Except nothing was routine when you didn't look like you belonged. He had been there less than 10 minutes when he saw them, 2 white men, watching. They weren't construction workers, they weren't neighbors. They were just standing there, like they were waiting for something, for him to prove their suspicions right. Darius exhaled. He had been through this before. Ignore them, do your job, keep moving. But the moment he pulled out his measuring tape, one of them started walking toward him. Darius glanced at the man's jacket. A security badge. Not police, but close enough. "Hey," the man called out. Darius turned, keeping his expression neutral. "Can I help you?" The man's lips pressed together. "Yeah." "What are you doing here?" Darius lifted the clipboard in his hand. "I work for Wallace & Co. We're surveying the property." The man didn't look at the clipboard. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, his eyes stayed on Darius. Like the papers didn't matter. Like his word didn't matter. Like his presence alone was a problem. "You got ID?" Darius clenched his jaw. Not this again. He had an ID, of course he did. But he knew what was happening. Knew that if he was white, this conversation wouldn't exist. Still, he pulled out his wallet and handed over his work badge. The man barely looked at it. "You got anything with a picture?" Darius's fingers tightened around his ID. "You need a picture," he said slowly, "to confirm I'm a black man standing in front of you?" The man's expression didn't change. "You're just doing my job." Darius wanted to laugh. That was what they always said. The cops in Boston, the store clerks in New Orleans, the people who followed him through parking lots, who locked their doors when he walked past, who clutched their bags like his presence alone was a threat. "Yeah," Darius muttered. "So am I." The second man stepped closer. "You got an attitude." Darius exhaled sharply. Here it was. The moment where he had to choose. Fight or fold. Call them out or walk away. He had fought before. He had argued. He had demanded respect. And he had lost. So this time, he took a breath and made the smarter choice. "I'm done here anyway," he said, slipping his wallet back into his pocket. He didn't wait for their response. Didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He just turned and walked away. Back at the office, Ethan barely looked up from his desk when Darius came in. "How'd it go?" Darius dropped the clipboard onto the table. "I won't be going back." Ethan frowned, finally looking up. Why not? Darius stared at him. He wondered if he should explain, if he should tell him what had happened, but he already knew how it would go. Ethan would shrug, say something about misunderstanding, maybe even chuckle and say they were just being careful. So instead, Darius just shook his head. I just won't. Ethan didn't ask again, didn't care enough to. That night, Darius sat in his apartment, staring at the Philadelphia skyline. He had thought this city would be different. He had convinced himself that things would change. But now he wasn't so sure. Because the truth was, the city didn't matter. Boston, New Orleans, Philly, it was all the same. Different streets, different faces, same rules, same fight. And no matter where he went, it was still a battle just to exist.